Well, California is doing it again, and by it, I mean the thing that makes half the country look at election night, then election week, then election month, and say, I'm sure this is totally fine, nothing to see here. Just democracy at work, right? According to reporting summarized by The Hill, President Trump and Republicans are raising concerns about California's vote counting after mayoral candidate Nithya Raman moved ahead of Spencer Pratt in the Los Angeles mayoral race, while a large number of ballots were still left to be counted. Now, of course, the official explanation is process, right? California has mail-in ballots. California has signature verification. California has postmark rules. California has curing periods. California has layers upon layers of procedure. And look, that may all be technically true, but here's the problem. When a system takes days, weeks, and sometimes practically a geological era to count ballots, the public does not see secure process. The public sees a black box. And when that black box keeps producing the same political pattern, people start asking questions. And they should. Because there's little to no doubt that Republicans will use what's happening in California as a launching pad to take another run at passing the SAVE Act. And as I've said before, I'm not against the SAVE Act in a vacuum. The basic idea that only American citizens should vote in American elections is not controversial. That used to be called having a country, if you remember those days. My objection is the enforcement mechanism. If Real ID becomes the practical doorway into voting, then we're not just talking about election integrity anymore. We're talking about pushing more Americans into the architecture of the surveillance state. So forgive me if I don't want the same government that can't count ballots before Thanksgiving managing national identification dragnet. And I'm not being paranoid here. I'm just recognizing the patterns. There are ways to verify identity and citizenship without building another digital leash around the neck of the American people. Birth certificates exist, passports exist, state systems, censorship records, paper exists, local verification exists. We do not need to choose between no standards and welcome to your federally trackable permission slip. But let's set that aside for just a moment, because the deeper issue here is not only who is allowed to vote, but who counts the votes and how and where and for how long. Because America has a long history of elections that left behind a trail of questions, suspicions, and that familiar smell of political smoke. Go back to 1960. Richard Nixon versus John F. Kennedy, one of the most famous disputed elections in modern American history. Illinois' vote count was razor thin. Chicago was the center of the controversy. For decades, people have suspected that Mayor Daley's machine and perhaps even mob-connected influence helped to deliver Illinois and thus the presidency to John F. Kennedy. Now, historians still argue whether the fraud was enough to change the outcome. That's not the point. The point is that the suspicion was not invented yesterday by some dude in a MAGA hat in his mom's basement on the internet, okay? These are legitimate questions that have been around for generations. We can look at Washington State in 2004. Republican Dino Rossi ran against Democrat Christian Gregoire for governor. Rossi won the first count. Then he won the machine recount. Then came the hand recount, and it was after that that Gregoire was declared the winner. Isn't it funny how that works? First count, Republican. Second count, Republican. Keep counting, Democrat. And then no more counting. We're done. At some point, even the most trusting person in America will start sounding like someone reading the fine print in a timeshare contract, right? You know, hey, I don't know, this kind of feels like a setup here. Well, then you can look at Minnesota in 2008, Norm Coleman versus Al Franken. Coleman, the Republican, led after the first count. The race went into a long recount and a protracted legal fight. There were challenged ballots, absentee ballots, rejected ballots, disputed ballots, the whole bureaucratic jambalaya. And when the smoke cleared, Al Franken, Democrat, won. Now, there were claims and rumors that circulated about ballots being found in strange places, like a story about ballots being found in the back of a car. The official record is more complicated than the folklore, but again, that's the point. When the process becomes so long, so murky, so lawyered up, so dependent on late-stage ballot discovery, the trust evaporates. And then, of course, there's 2020. We, the millions of Americans who went to bed on election night with President Trump ahead in several key states, only to wake up the next morning and see Joe Biden surging after late counted ballots came in heavily Democratic. Now, the official explanation was mail-in voting. Democrats use mail-in ballots more heavily than Republicans. Some states counted different categories of votes at different times. This is the explanation. But explanations are not the same thing as trust, because what people saw was this. Trump was ahead. The counting dragged on through the night. The windows got covered up in places like Detroit. Observers complained about access. And then, surprise and lo and behold, the late counted ballots just happened to be enough to flip the outcome to Biden. So once again, when the Democrat needed votes, votes appeared. And when the Republican loses, we're told, well, that's just democracy. Accept the results. Stop asking questions. Move along. And that brings us back to today. California says it is simply counting ballots according to the rules. Well, that's fine. But maybe the rules are the problem. Because if your election system is technically legal, but practically corrosive to public trust, that's not a triumph of democracy. Really, that's a slow motion civic acid bath, if you will. And here's another interesting historical note. No Republican has ever won the presidency without carrying Ohio. Florida is also a major modern Republican bellwether. Richard Nixon carried Ohio and Florida in 1960 and lost. Donald Trump carried Ohio and Florida in 2020 and lost. And coincidentally, those are the only two Republicans who ever lost who carried both Ohio and Florida, and both in suspicious elections. Now, does that prove fraud? No. But does it make people raise an eyebrow when combined with late night counting, delayed results, and ballot dumps that always seem to break in one particular direction? Yes. And this is where the political class insults the intelligence of the American people. They act like skepticism is treason. It is most certainly not. Skepticism is what responsible citizens do when the people in charge keep saying, trust us, while behaving in ways that make trusting them impossible. Why do election counts require so much secrecy? Why are observers pushed back? Why are windows covered? Why are we still counting days and weeks later, especially in the most technologically advanced era, in the most technologically advanced country in the history of the world? We can move money between continents in seconds. We can track your phone, your car, your purchases, your face, your carbon footprint, your social media posts, and probably how long you stare at a package of Oreos in aisle 7. But counting ballots? Well, apparently that takes longer than building the pyramids. At some point, this is not about technology. It's about will. If America wants secure elections, then yes, require proof of identity, require proof of citizenship. Absolutely, clean the voter rolls. Stop pretending it's oppressive to ask someone to prove they are eligible to participate in the governing of our country. But if that's where the conversation stops, then we're missing half the problem. Because the vote itself is only one side of the equation. The count is the other. And that's where accountability must be immediate, visible, public, bipartisan, auditable, and fast. No more mystery rooms. No more come back next week. No more, hey, we found another batch of votes over here. No more, the observers can watch from across the room with the binoculars and a ham sandwich. No more pretending that secrecy equals security. Security without transparency is it's really unchecked power. There is a quote that's often attributed to the evil dictator Joseph Stalin. It says something to the effect of, those who vote decide nothing, those who count the vote decide everything, or a variation thereof. The exact wording and attribution are disputed, but the idea is chilling, because it's true enough, I believe, that would make everyone's skin crawl here. A dictator would understand. A dictator would understand this concept better than anyone else. All right. If you control the count, you control the outcome. And if the American people do not trust the count, then they're not going to trust the outcome. And if we do not trust the outcome, Well, it stands to reason we won't trust the government that is built on top of it, and look where we are. This is not extremism. This is basic civil math. And there's a biblical principle that applies here too. Proverbs 11, verse 1 says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, that verse is specifically about dishonest scales, crooked measurements, rigged systems, a merchant putting his thumb on the scale and pretending that the customer got a fair deal. But the principle applies far beyond the marketplace. God hates crooked weights because crooked weights corrupt trust. They take what belongs to one person and quietly in the cover of darkness shift it to another. They turn a public transaction into a private theft. And what is an election if it's not a national weighing? The people put their ballots on the scale. The count is supposed to measure the will of the people honestly. But if the scale is hidden, delayed, manipulated, inaccessible, or impossible to audit, then whether fraud happened or not, the system has already failed the trust test. A just weight must be visible. A fair scale has to be inspectable, and an honest count must be accountable. So yeah, let's talk about voter ID. Let's talk about citizenship. Let's talk about the SAVE Act. Let's talk about who is voting. But we had better also talk about who is counting these votes. Because if we secure the front door but leave the back door wide open, we have not protected the house. We've only created the illusion of protection. And that may be the most dangerous thing of all. A republic cannot survive on vibes and slogans and just trust us themed press conferences. The republic survives when the people know the rules. Has not demanded it, but earned it. So here's the question America has to answer. Do we want elections that are merely certified by officials or elections that are trusted by citizens? Because those are not always the same thing. And when the counting room gets darker and the timeline gets longer and the explanations get thinner, too many questions. The problem is that the people counting the votes keep giving us reasons to ask these questions in the first place. What do you think? Leave your comments below. Do you think what's going on with the California mayoral race is fishy, suspect? Or do you think, hey, that's just for the tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists who think everything is a giant cabal against freedom? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Again, be as civil as you can. We don't have to disagree, but we can still share the space, all right? And again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We are growing slowly and steadily, and we appreciate every single one of you new subscribers who have come on board over the past few weeks. You can also find us on some additional pages. Facebook, look for Andrew Southwick Official on Facebook. On X, you can look for CC Podcast 2023, and we're adding some additional social media pages and other platforms really quickly, so be on the lookout for those. And of course, right here on our YouTube channel as well, Culture Crossroads 316. Again, we thank you for your time. Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching.